Hi,
Hey,
Neil.
it's so good to see you.
Great to see you. I know my followers just love hearing from you. And I am going to ask you about the op ed you wrote in the New York Times today. But, Neil, I'm going to ask you to explain it to us in very simple terms because I think it's very complicated. And you conceded, even as a law professor, you have a hard time understanding what you are, what is actually going on. But tell me if I've got this right, and then you can explain it. Donald Trump and many Republicans have spent a lot of time, despite the fact that, 61 or 62 courts have said they don't have evidence. Neal Katyal is a Georgetown University law professor and was acting solicitor general during the Obama administration for people who wanted to know. Sorry, Neil, somebody didn't know who you were. Can you
I don't know
imagine?
who I am
Anyway,
either.
anyway,
When's
so they spent a lot of time saying this election was illegitimate, was rigged, if you will. And now, quietly behind the scenes, in a number of states, in different ways, the infrastructure is being set up, which will actually create the circumstances for an election to be rigged. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think you basically got it. So, I've been thinking for the last several months about Donald Trump, about what he's been saying, what those around him, like JD Vance, have been saying. And I've come to the conclusion that I think that they are going to, if they lose in the vote on November 5th, they're still going to declare victory, just like Trump did after the debate. I won the debate, and then say the election was rigged when the evidence doesn't support that he won the election. And, so I spent months just trying to understand what all the rules are, what the different pieces of the playbook that Trump has available. And I think in many ways, Katie, this is the most important op-ed I've ever written because it really tries to take the legal landscape and marry it to Trump's stated ambitions. And when you add them together, it's frankly terrifying. And your viewers know that normally I'm the voice of calm. Normally I'm the voice that says, hey, the system is going to hold. We have institutions, we have principle, we have tradition, history, and the like. And I'm really worried about it this time around because really, Trump tried this in 2020. He tried to steal the election. It didn't work, but he's had 4 years with his minions to go pro and study what to do. And in 2020, Trump lost the Electoral College massively. Biden got 306 votes. Trump got 232. So when Trump launched all of his challenges, he couldn't just win in one state in order to flip the election back in 2020. He had to win multiple different challenges, which is really hard. That might not be true this year. It might come down to one state, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, who knows, Georgia. Um, in which case, all the his task in terms of overturning the election is going to be a lot easier than it was before. And so that's like basically why I'm writing the piece to explain what Trump can do in the courts. What can he do with state governors? What can he do with state legislatures? What can he do with election boards? And what can he do in the US Congress?
So I wondered if you could simplify it for us, Neil, because you do write about the various ways that the election results in different states could be rendered null and void or overturned by a whole host of bodies, from, as you said, Board of Elections to governors to state legislatures. So just explain it like I'm in eighth grade, and you're my civics teacher. How have they, first of all, I guess before you get into specifics, who is behind all this?
So they're already like a whole Trump machinery. Stephen Miller, his former advisor, they're off filing lawsuits already. They filed, I think, 90 lawsuits to try and prevent people from voting in different ways, challenging voting laws that make it easier for people to vote, trying to restrict mail drop boxes and things like that. So there's a concerted effort right now, Katie, even before the election, to try and make it harder for people to vote.
So were they recruiting all these people since 2020 to kind of help in various states?
Yeah, it looks that way. I mean, that's I only know what the newspapers tell me, but that is what they're saying. So let me just like make it really simple. Like, what could Trump do? So let's say Pennsylvania is won by 50,000, 80,000 votes or something like that by Kamala Harris. These Trump lawyers could go in and say, oh, you had some wrong people voting. They voted in the wrong county. Their ballots weren't exactly clear who they voted for. Maybe they didn't sign the inner envelope. If it's a mail in ballot, they have to sign twice. Any number of possibilities to try and throw out some votes. That'll then go to the courts. And it may go to state court, in which in Pennsylvania you have partisan judges. It may go to federal court, which are ostensibly nonpartisan. And then that case may go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And, even if the Supreme Court acts in a totally nonpartisan way, we need to wonder whether that's the way the American people are going to view it at this point, given the court's kind of historic low in terms of popular opinion polls and the like with the court. So you've got courts as one possible place. You have election boards in which the Republicans could say, hey, that mail in ballot in Pennsylvania, those don't count. Or people voting, people voted who shouldn't have, you got to throw that out. So that's another way. Or you could try and put pressure on the governor to disqualify. There's all sorts of different opportunities for mischief. And the more we start talking about and understanding that the most precious right we have as Americans, our right to vote, might be taken away by some internal self dealing in a back room, in a court, or in a legislature, or a governor's mansion, or an election board, the better.
Aren't there state laws, Neil, to prevent these shenanigans from happening? How can these, officials be replaced by, say, Trump loyalists or other people? I mean, it just does, it seems uh, so unfair and so undemocratic. And aren't there laws that prohibit this from
There,
happening? There ought to be a
there,
law.
right. There are some laws, and Congress, in fact, in 2022, passed an important law called the Electoral Count Reform Act to try and make it harder for shenanigans to occur. There are a couple problems with that, Katie. Three, I would say. One is the law is just paper. James Madison in Federalist Paper 51 says it's a mere parchment barrier. And parchment is no good against a concerted enemy who has ambition and who wants to set aside democracy. It only does so much. As we've seen over the last several years, Trump has gotten away with all sorts of law breaking, hasn't been brought to justice. So, one problem is just the nature of law. The second, which closely relates to that, is the personnel. Trump has had 4 years to purge the Republican Party of people who didn't believe the big lie. He's put people in place, including in local election boards. His vice presidential candidate, Katie, couldn't even admit that Trump lost in 2020. That's all you need to know. So he's changed people like Pence, who at some point discovered one vertebra on January 6th, 2021. But now you've got someone who has no vertebra, who's literally just all in on the big lie back in 2020. And you kind of know that tells you, I think, all you need to know about where he's going to be in 2024. And then the third thing is there's a move among Republican lawyers and scholars to say those laws that you're talking about that should prevent this are unconstitutional, that they don't count, that they should be invalid because they, interfere with the original understanding of the Constitution.
Well, I have to ask you about some good news because there was a ruling in Georgia yesterday, Neil, that in which a county judge rejected the argument that local election officials have the power to refuse to certify election results. So again, he rejected that argument. So that was good news, right,
No,
Neil?
very good news for that judge to do that. He's a Republican appointed judge, as I understand it, and and has reached the right pro-democratic conclusion. And by the way, that's the way the Republican Party used to be. Like I had the privilege of arguing the Voting Rights Act case in 2010. It had just been renewed by Congress, 421 to 3 in the House of Representatives, 98 to 0 in the Senate. That's the kind of consensus we've had for most of my lifetime, which is the right to vote's the most precious thing. Republicans and Democrats alike fought for it. And now we're seeing that, really gone. And I'm glad to see this judge in Georgia do the right thing. But Katie, here's the bad news. That's just one guy in Georgia. That case can be appealed to the Georgia Intermediate Court, to the Georgia Supreme Court, and we don't know what's going to happen. And that's the worry, that there's such a concerted playbook now that is bent on trying to take our votes away.
And as you write in your New York Times op ed, this effort has been professionalized, and I still go back to the question by whom, Neil? Who are the people other than Stephen Miller who are orchestrating all the National Republican Party? Like, who's pulling the strings? Who is the man behind the curtain?
Well, I think it ultimately traces back to Donald Trump, who's, I think pushing the big lie since 2020, still can't admit that he lost the election, and is now trying to get all of the machinery in place to basically do a steal in 2024. And let me say one other really scary scenario, which is the role of the United States Congress. Remember what Pence did on January 6, 2021. He rejected Trump's calls to try and throw out the votes from one state or another because of ostensible voter fraud. Trump tried to flip the election in Congress on January 6th. Well, Pence is no longer around, and fortunately the vice president is Vice President Harris. But under the new rules that were passed in 2022, if both houses, the House and Senate, by simple majority vote, say those electoral college votes don't count because they were procured by fraud or bribery or something like that, they can throw out either an individual member of the Electoral College's vote or the entire slate of electors from a particular state. And that could swing the election. And so you really do have the possibility that the House of Representatives and the Senate could be picking the next president, particularly if things get close. So remember my Pennsylvania example before. Let me just make it really simple. Let's just say Trump loses Pennsylvania by 80,000 votes. He tries to challenge it in the courts. He loses. He claims vote fraud, mail-in ballot fraud, who knows. Even if he loses in the courts, he can then go to Congress. And if he can persuade a majority of the House, which seems already in on the big lie from 2020, let alone 2024, and a majority of the Senate to throw out Pennsylvania, then Pennsylvania might be gone. And then, the election could be flipped in the other direction.
By the way, we have a few more minutes with Neil, so if anybody has questions, just put them in the question section. But Neil, to that point, on Meet the Press this Sunday, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was asked if he would certify the election results regardless of who wins. And he said, quote, yes, if the election is free and fair and legal. And we pray and hope that it is. Is he setting himself up to not certify the election or to make his own judgment along with other members of the House?
I can't say what's in his heart, so but certainly the statement there gives a lot of wiggle room and the ability for him to basically do big lie, the sequel in 2024 and say, well, it wasn't free and fair. There was fraud and stuff like that. And the Republican Party has been known to make stuff up. JD Vance in the vice presidential debate claimed that Trump saved Obamacare. Now, I argued the Obamacare case. I can guarantee you Donald Trump did not save Obamacare. Okay. So if they're going to do that there and lie about that, aren't they going to lie about voting? I mean, everything suggests that they will. I mean, what makes, another way of putting the point that I wrote in the op ed is what gives you any confidence that if Trump loses, he wouldn't pull out this playbook? Of course he's going to.
Okay, so a lot of people in the question section are saying, what can we do about this before it happens, before the chaos? So a lot of people don't, what can be done about this? And are there any antidotes? What are the Democrats doing in the face of all these things? So I realize those are
Yeah,
two questions, but maybe answer the first, like what can the average citizen do?
right. So I think there's three things to do. One is just we really need to create a movement in favor of democracy and the right to vote. And that's, people of every political persuasion. And we need, I want to see George W. Bush talking about this. I want to see Mitt Romney talking about this. I want to see, Karl Rove talking about this. And, draw attention to really what truly makes America great is democracy. And that these are real threats and, the law, as you were saying, Katie, is written to prevent them, but there's a move to try and throw out the law. And we need to really guard against that. So that's one thing. The second is it's the new Congress on January 6th that calls the shots,
Right.
not the
You
old
mentioned that in
Congress.
your piece.
Yeah. So that what that means is that, as you think about who to vote for in this election, not just the president, but the House and Senate, they very well may be deciding who our next president is, not you and
Well,
me.
what
And
if the
so,
House and Senate, someone asked in the question section, what if the House and Senate are controlled by Democrats?
yeah, so if the House and Senate are controlled by Democrats, then they have the ability to prevent, these kinds of big lie things from mattering in the U.S. Congress. Now, if the courts try and invalidate certain states or something like that, then, there's still opportunities for mischief. So it's not as if a Democratic Congress is the firewall alone, but it is obviously a big help because the Democrats, unlike the Republicans, don't seem to be trying to make up stories about voter irregularities and stuff like that. And then the last thing to do, and maybe the most important to answer your readers' question or your viewers' questions, is you know whoever wins has got to win by, but like I think particularly if it's Harris, she's got to win by more than just one state. It's got to look more like what Biden was able to succeed in 2020 with 306 to 232. Because if it's really close and it's down to one state, there will be immense pressure, and Trump is better at putting pressure on people than anyone um, to try and throw out an election that was free and fair in order to give him the raw power to be the next president.
Are you saying that, like Brad Raffensperger, who was the Secretary of State in the state of Georgia, when Donald Trump asked him to find me 11,000 whatever votes, 472, I can't remember, and Brad Raffensperger basically told him to pound sand and recorded
Uh,
the conversation. He didn't say pound sand. He actually voted for Donald Trump and was very polite. But are you saying that, like, the secretaries of state who oversee these elections, that they have been replaced by Trump loyalists in many states?
Yeah, some have been replaced, so that's certainly a worry. Absolutely. And that's also true not just at the kind of Secretary of State level, but it's true in the courts, it's true in the legislatures, and it's true even with the vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump. And so we have more reason to worry about the personnel. Now, Raffensperger is still in power. That's great. And that gives me confidence along with the governor in Georgia, who seems like
Brian
someone who
Kemp.
has, yeah, who seems like someone who I think is saying the right things about democracy and the like. So, Georgia may be of less concern than some other
What
states.
are some
But
of the states you're particularly worried about, Neil? That I mean, you've been studying this issue. Where is it like your hair is on fire?
yeah, I'm not going to get into that right now. So, but, you
No,
know,
about the states you're
no,
concerned about?
no, I think, my hope is that the states are going to do the right thing. I don't want to single any particular state out at this point, but I think the things to think about are states, legislatures, governors, election boards, United States Congress, and then courts, both state and federal. And remember, many courts are elected in this country, and they run as Democrats or Republicans. And the idea that a partisan court could be settling the election is a really kind of scary prospect.
Well, let me ask you about the Democratic response to this. I mean, the Democrats have lots of lawyers on their side. Are they gearing up for all these challenges, Neil? And are they well aware of this quote unquote infrastructure that's kind of been established over the last 4 years that will call into question a lot of these state results?
I mean, I have to think they have to be. I mean, it's just so obvious that this machinery exists. We've got the visible proof in the form of 90 lawsuits having been filed already. At this point in 2020, only one third, 30 or so, had been filed. So there's lots of visible indicia. And then you've got people who are just saying, this is, the Republicans are saying this is part of the playbook. And so, I'm sure they're aware of it. I'm sure they have good lawyers. But at the end of the day, Trump has put a lot of personnel in that may make it hard for, the centrist people who believe in the law to hold.
And I'm this. I'll let you go because I know you've got stuff to do, Neil. But you know, the election is certified right on January 6th. Is there a chance that this could drag on, and because of these legal challenges, the election can't be certified by that date, and perhaps the peaceful transfer of power can't even happen on January 20th?
Yeah, no, there's a risk that November 5th is not going to be the day in which we know the election results, a chance that even January 6th may not be. And it might be that no candidate gets a majority of the Electoral College after Congress acts on January 6th, in which case the election is thrown under the 12th Amendment to the Constitution to the U.S. House of Representatives. And then it's a whole crazy process. It's not a majority of the House of Representatives, it's a majority of the states. So you add up each state delegation and each state gets one vote. And so right now, if that vote were taken, there are 26 states that are controlled by Republican delegations. And so Trump would win under the 12th Amendment. It's, of course, the new Congress, not the old Congress, that's going to pick in the event of a tie or a circumstance in which someone doesn't have a majority in the Electoral College. All of this is a long way of saying, Katie, this stuff is incredibly complicated and intricate, the rules around all of this. But the thing I want all of our viewers to take away from it is there is a clear and present threat to your right to vote right now. And there are people who are bent on trying to take it away from you. And the best thing you can do to make sure your vote is heard is make sure it comes with a lot of other votes and that the election is not close. Because if the election is close in those battleground states and the electoral college vote is close, there will be a lot of opportunities for mischief in state courts, federal courts, state legislatures, state election boards, state governors, and the U.S. Congress.
This is all making my head hurt, but let's just stay in touch and watch this space, everyone, and certainly convince people to go out and vote. So we're not going to be talking about this beyond January 6th, but it sounds like that is a possibility. Neil, as always, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching,
Real pleasure to be with you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.